four key ways that are important for the whole story. First, it's global. I've already argued that. Second, it's long-term, and that means that people can't see so easily the consequences of what they're doing. If you drive your car on the road and then you know, because other people are doing it to you, that you slow other people down. It was pretty obvious in London in the 50s when we started to get rid of the smog that was causing the bronchitis and stopping the traffic and so on. We could be pretty clear what we were doing. So in the case of congestion, we talk about the congestion charge, we use a price mechanism. In the case of smog in London, we insisted that you couldn't burn coal, you had to have smoke-free fuel. So that was an example of a price in the first case, for the externality, the congestion charge, or a regulation in the second case when we were trying to deal with smog in London. Those are, is what I want to emphasise here, those are things that people can see. You can see immediately what's going on. The problem with climate change is that this is an externality with these very long-term effects. The carbons that you emit in any one year build up the stocks in the atmosphere over time. And then those stocks in the atmosphere have an effect on temperature and other climate variables over time. So the lags are long. So that's the second part of the story. Third, this is riddled with risks and uncertainties. Partly because, of course, the climate itself is an uncertain phenomenon, but we still, from the point of view of the science, need to know more about how all this works. We know enough to understand the risks, and the science has really moved on this in the last 3 or 4 years. It's given us the probabilities so that now we can use the language of probabilities, where previously we didn't have that. And that's a key advance, because it means you can bring the economics of risk to the table. But it is full of uncertainty. Nobody can forecast these effects precisely. You have to work in terms of the analysis of risk. And certainly if you're talking about effects going out into the next century, which you have to, if you're going to discuss this issue, because what we do now over these next few decades affect what's happened at the end of the century and into the next. So you can't really think about the consequences of your actions until you take that very long-term view. The uncertainties about economic forecasting over 100 years or 150 years are obviously enormous too, let alone the uncertainties about forecasting climate itself. So this is, the economics of risk has to be at the core of the analysis. And lastly, we have to recognise that this is a kind of risk which involves potentially very big changes. It's not like building a railroad where you've got an investment project and you have to pay some money up front and you get the returns down the track, but basically you're not transforming the world or an economy. You're giving it a boost, and that, in the jargon of economics, means you can use sort of marginal analysis. Invest a bit more now, get a bit more later. This is an effect that could actually change the whole growth path that your economy, the economies of the rest of the world, are on. So that makes the analytics of it, from the point of view of economics, a bit more difficult. And of course, given the long time lags, if you are unsuccessful in mitigating the emissions, reducing the emissions, and you're unlucky that the bad cases do occur, then it's very difficult to turn back. If you've got that far, you can't just say, oh, well, didn't want to be here, and back off a bit and sort it out that way. You can't do that, because these things are just building up in the atmosphere. They stay there for hundreds of years, the greenhouse gases, and they're there. So the fourth major difference is this idea of very big and irreversible change. So what I'll try to do is to say something quickly about the links between temperature and impacts, and then the link between greenhouse gases and temperature. That will be about the first part of the review. The first part of the review is impacts, risks, costs, and targets. The second part of the review is how you get together to bring the right policies to the table. So first you look at what might happen and what sensible targets would be, then you discuss the policies, the international policies, which could guide that. So let's stay with the first part, and we'll begin with the... I aim here? Oh, that's good. So this is the link between the temperatures, and the possible impacts. I can't go through all this, obviously, in detail. Do please consult the review itself. I'm sure you are into www.sternreview.org endlessly. Details on this, of course, are there. And what I want to emphasise here is just a couple of things. First is that there are a whole range of dimensions that matter here. It affects agriculture and food, it affects water, it affects ecosystems, and